and welcome to Fireside Paranormal Podcast. My name is Jordan Cline, and I got a fun show for you tonight. I have author Michael Gagliardi. He wrote the book Devil Take The Hindmost. It's about the true story of his harrowing 12-plus year survival with his possessed mother. It is intense. Before we get into that, I do want to remind you we do have our Krampus merch. If you go to firesideparanormal.com, I believe it is on sale right now, so you want to check that out. But that is only available to the end of the year, so grab it while you can. I really do appreciate all the pictures you guys have been posting in the Facebook group. If you guys want to see that too, it's Fireside Paranormal Hub. We have a lot of fun there. We do have a Patreon that we set up. We have a Discord server that we set up. To get on the Discord, you got to be on the Patreon, so check that out, patreon.com/Fireside Paranormal Podcast. Last week, we started featuring a story from you, our listeners, and I'd like to continue on with that. So this week's featured story comes in from Cassandra.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cassandra. I am from around the Washington, Pennsylvania area. And yeah, so my paranormal experiences started whenever I was a kid. I started by seeing my great aunt after she had passed away. She had left me a ring that has been passed down through the family, and I received it the night of her funeral. And that night, I saw her appear in my bedroom doorway, and she just kind of smiled and then disappeared. And I took that as my way of knowing that she was okay and at peace. Needless to say, after that, I started sleeping with my door closed, though. But ever since then, I've been kind of seeing some things throughout our house, and nothing bad, though. So I consider myself a little blessed in that sense because everything has been good, but we do have orbs that float around the house, and I quite frequently hear giggling, and I wish they would share the joke with me because that would be much appreciated. But we hear a lot of whispering as well, so we know there's a small group because you hear a little throughout the house often. The most clear vocals that I have ever gotten, I was home alone one day, kind of searching through my room, looking for a lost object, kind of, whispering to myself, where is it? Where is it? And I hear, there. Turned around, and right there was the object right in front of me. So appreciate that they're helpful, at least. They kind of found my lost object. So that's much appreciated. They could do that a little more. I would say the thing that's been the most apparent to me, we lost our cat. She was about 16 years old. We had to put her down, and until we had lost our dog that she was best friends with, we would often see her floating around the house, kind of roaming around after she was gone. And she wasn't the most friendly cat in the world, and she continued to be that way after death. And I would often sit in the recliner with my arm over the recliner armchair, and I would say, oh, here comes Pris. And she would walk up and I'd say to my mom, I'd say, watch this. And then scratch marks would appear up my arm. And she would just kind of disappear in and out, and you'd see her again, and she'd flick her tail, walk away, and just disappear into air. And I'm like, why do you still hate me even after you're gone? I don't really much appreciate that, but okay. And that continued on for about a year until we had lost our corgi, who was her best friend. And the day that the corgi died, the cat disappeared forever after that. So I hope she's at peace now and they're running around somewhere because they love to agitate each other. But it is an interesting story to know that she was still there afterwards, although it definitely could have done without being scratched. But I would say that's probably the most surreal experience I've had. Yeah, so if you guys are interested in country music, I do run my own podcast, and so I was told to go ahead and plug that here. So you guys can find Kickin' It Country on all social media pages, and we have a website as well, www.sites.google.com/view/Kickin' It Country Show. Brand new, just getting started, so yeah, go check that out.
Thank you so much, Cassandra. And if you want to be one of our featured stories of the week, make sure you email us at firesideparanormalpodcast@gmail.com. You can either write your story out and we'll read it, or you can record yourself saying it and we'll put it up on the air. We have an event coming up called Hidden Marietta Paranormal Exposition. In the ballroom of the haunted and historic Lafayette Hotel, we will gather together all those who delight in the supernatural. From hands-on activities to speakers teaching you the secrets of haunted objects and locations, they have a unique array of creepy creative merchandise and a lot of things to experience and learn There will be tours of the Lafayette also available. Advance tickets are $12 per person. Tickets at the door are $15 per person. And this event is coming January 29th, 2022. And that is going to be an earlier show. It's going to be 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. I'm going to have a table set up to record your stories. It's going to be a lot of fun. Do a little meet and greet. Can't wait to see you guys there. All right, I want to get to our guest. Sit with me by the fire as we welcome Michael Gagliardi. He is the author of Devil Take The Hindmost. It is the true story of his harrowing 12-plus year survival with his possessed mother. Michael, you with us?
Yes, it's an honor to be with you today. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
And thank you so much for being flexible. I know we've had to switch schedules around several times to make sure we link this up. You're all the way on the other side of the country for us. Where are you located?
I'm in the Coachella Valley, the home of Coachella Fest.
And I'm in West Virginia, home of bluegrass.
Yeah, nice. Always wanted to go there.
Yeah, there you go. So tell me about your book, Devil Take the Hindmost.
Well, the book kind of came about in a strange way. I'm 53 years old now, and what happened to me was, in the early 70s to mid 80s, and I've been an adult a long time now, and never thought of writing a book. But during COVID, I had a lot of downtime.
Yeah,
because I'm a musician by trade, and we were the first industry to leave and the last to come back. So I began to write my story, and the reason why I was writing it was really just a legacy for my daughters. I have two daughters and 6 grandkids. So
wow, congrats.
I was writing it really for them and my grandchildren, so that if they wanted to see, know what happened, because it's not the type of subject that you go around talking to families about, your family. It's a very unpleasant subject, and it's hard for me, to talk about it. It's very stressful. Even when I do interviews about it, I start to get into it, and at some point I start, getting the shakes and, that kind of thing. It's just part of it, and while I was writing it, I think it took me 8 months to write the first book, and my girls would check in with me and say, "Hey, Dad, how are you doing? How's the book coming along?" And I said, "Yeah, it's coming along pretty good. Just writing a little bit here and there because it's really stressful, to write about this stuff, And they would say, Dad, you really got to make this public." And I said, at first I was, no. Because I was always afraid of, the rejection and people saying, "Oh, you're lying," or "You're trying to sell books," or, things like that. And I couldn't even care less about those things. But as I began to progress in it and got 3/4 of the way through, my girls would still say, "You know what, Dad, you always said that, no one helped you during this time. Maybe someone else could be going through this, and your story could be out there for somebody else to go, hey, this is what's happening to a friend I know." And that kind of hit me. But really what really threw me over the edge was, I really didn't know how people were going to accept it, because it is a wild, outlandish story. It is, it's 12 plus years of just hell and terror. It really is horrible.
Wow.
And I had seen, I was about, 90% done. And I took a break from writing one day, and I was watching on Netflix. I was watching a documentary called Hostage to the Devil by Martin Stalker of Belfast. He's a producer, and he put out this movie. And it was about, the Jesuit priest Malachi Martin and his, 30 years as an exorcist and all this kind of stuff. So I was watching it, and at the end, I was really impressed with how the producer really delved into this stuff. I don't know if he was a believer or a non-believer, but he took a real, neutral side, and he did a lot of research. I think it took him 6 years to do the book, or to do the series, the documentary,
wow.
which I think got picked up by a big company in Hollywood, and I think they're going to do a movie of it. But, I thought to myself, you know what? Now here's a guy that I think I would feel comfortable with telling my story to, and this was, I wasn't even done yet. And so what I did was I sent him a little email and I said, hey, Martin, I really liked your documentary series. I can relate to much of it. I didn't really say that much. I just told him I was writing, I was finishing up a book. And he said, yeah, well, when you get it done, send it to me. I'd like to read it. And, I finished up the book. I got it edited. I got it published. And then I sent him a manuscript, a digital manuscript.
Uh-huh.
I think I sent it to him on a Friday. And he contacted me on Monday.
Oh,
I guess he read the book over the weekend, and he said, listen, Michael, this is crazy. And I got to do something with this, So he was the first one to really, other than just family and friends, he was the first outsider, so to speak, to give me a unbiased, look at it, because I really didn't know how people were going to. I mean, when it's your life, people don't like listening to their own voice on the radio.
Well, but beyond that too, I mean, that's something very personal you went through. It's not like you just drove to the grocery store and told somebody about it. So there had to be a level of vulnerability going with that too, like putting it out there.
Oh, it was intense for me. I was so afraid of people. You live through this horrible thing. I kind of relate it to, a lot of Holocaust victims. When people say, well, the Holocaust didn't exist, and you're standing there talking to somebody who's like 93 years old, who was a Jew in Auschwitz or Dachau, and they're like, what are you talking about? I was there, and that is the kind of rejection that I couldn't handle. Because, I have extreme post-traumatic stress from all of this. I still pass out even today. I have blackouts, So, I'm really, protective and cautious, about what I do in life, and it was really hard for me. But once I got some feedback from Marty said, hey, you know what? You should put it out there, man. You should put it out there. And I think that's kind of what threw me over the edge to really speak about it. And I'll tell you, now that it's been out, I think the book was published in August of this year. And since it's been out, I get a few kind of heckling people that will write me and say, I don't know if I can believe that. I don't really care.
Right.
I mean, I'm not trying to convince anybody. This was my story. I was an eyewitness, and I'm just simply telling it the way it was, and whether it sells books or not, I don't care. I'm 53 years old. I'm well into life. I have a career, and I couldn't care less. I'm not out to make $1 million or anything like that. I just wanted to put it out there, because people thought it had some value. I think that's really what Marty conveyed to me, is that it had value. It had value to other people that were suffering. And that was one of the first times I realized that not only did I suffer, but my mother suffered.
Oh, yeah.
My mother, she suffered extremely, and I look back at that and I think, my God, now that I think about it, it is the most, bombastic, crazy, sick story I've ever heard in my entire life. But growing up as a kid and even being an adult, I never viewed it as that. That was my life. I didn't know anything different. So it's like taking somebody who's been living out in the jungle all their life and then bringing them to a supermarket, and seeing a supermarket for the first time and going, wow, what is this?
Well, I also think, like what your daughter said, like, who knows like somebody could be going through something right now that, might pick up your book or hear about your book and completely
have the
touch
courage
them.
to say something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And those were the mitigating factors that really threw me over the edge. I mean, it took time. It took probably, I think, 6 months where I actually, said, came to a decision where I said, yeah, okay, I'm going to publish it. I was really cautious. I was really afraid. So it did take some time, but looking back now, in hindsight, I'm really glad I did it. I get, a lot of people contact me from all over the world, and they're I would say 90% sympathetic, which I'm very grateful for.
Yeah.
I get a few people that write me and say some nasty things and stuff, but that's with anything. I mean, you can be Michael Jackson and people can hate you. You know what I mean?
Right.
So yeah. So I'm pretty confident now about being able to talk about this, knowing that for the majority of people that are listening, they're taking me at my word, which was really the fear of it all. Was having people not believe you, because that's a terrible feeling.
Absolutely.
To go through something painful and then have somebody just toss you off like that's just something I didn't want to deal with. So.
Now, how old were you when this all started?
Well, the first incident, we were living in Mississauga, Ontario, Canada, and it was probably 1971 or 72. So I wasn't in school yet, and that was the incident where my mother came up behind me and dumped hot soup all down my shoulder.
Oh gosh.
That was the beginning of it. And I remember very clearly that day. And when that happened, I mean, I was screaming my head off, but she never consoled me. She never touched me. And I remember her calling a taxi, and we're going to the doctor, and she never said anything to me in the taxi ride. I don't even remember really seeing the doctor, but I remember going back home in the taxi. She never said a word to me. And when we got home, she never consoled me. And, that was the beginning of the trauma, where I began to be very aware of her movements. It traumatized me as a child,
I can imagine.
And that was the beginning.
Now, was there like a gap in between like that happening and the next incident, or was that just like the start of it all and bam, bam, bam?
Well, yeah, that was the beginning. And we moved from that apartment into another house. And from that time, from the soup thing, she became very disconnected from me. So she wasn't really taking care of me. Like, I can't remember ever my mother being nurturing and being a mother, holding me or doing anything. I can't remember any of that. I never had any of that, and she just got progressively worse. And, my sister, who is 7 years older than me, we kind of got together and talked a little bit about this, that in the early, before I was born, and we look at this as this is probably the entry point for all of this, is that she loved her father. She adored and loved her father. And he died in a horrible train accident. He was, crossing railroad tracks. I think he was drunk from what I'm told. And he got his legs cut off by a train and he died.
Wow.
And yeah, not only was it traumatic, but she loved him greatly. And so greatly. I mean, she just adored him. And I think later on in the next few years, her and her sister, because she had a younger sister and a younger brother. I remember being 4 years old, and I remember them talking in the kitchen. I'd be in my room, going to sleep, but the door would be open. Adults don't think that kids can hear or they don't understand, but they can remember.
Yeah.
And I remember them talking about seances and ESP and all this kind of stuff. The early 70s were the time where people were swinging and, seances and being around a table and Ouija boards and all that. That's when it was really big. So I remember that word seance. I had heard it a number of times. So I really believe that her and her sister tried to contact their father. And I think that was really the entry point, because it was right at that time where my mother became disassociative with us as children. And then, she began talking to herself. She began seeing things. She began hearing voices. knocking, scratching, and then here we go. And it just got worse and worse and worse as the years went by.
Now, this wasn't just to you either. This was to your siblings?
Yeah, I have one older sister, and we were all aware of it. By the time we moved from there, we moved to Meaford, which was 120 miles out of the Toronto area, and that's where we lived the rest of our childhood lives. Once we moved up there, it started to get so bad that even though I grew up with my sister, I never saw her because she was living in her room with a padlock on the inside of her door.
Oh, wow.
And I never saw her. And I mean, we grew up together, but I never saw her. She'd pop in and out to grab food and water and then go right back in her room and lock the door because things were getting, crazy. And we moved away. The weird thing was that, by the time I was in kindergarten, we moved away, but my dad had to drive all the way back down 120 miles to where we moved from to go to work.
Oh,
and
wow.
all of a sudden we were for lack of better words, excommunicated, so to speak, by our entire family. Both sides of our family never came to see us the whole time that we lived there for the next 12, 13 years, which was extremely odd.
Yeah.
And to this day, I'm not really sure what exactly happened, but there was some sort of fraction, in the family. And I really believe it was a result of, my mom and her sister getting into things, because I remember her daughter, who was my age, she would write me letters about strange occurrences in their house and strange things going on. And when I went for the first time back to Toronto, because I left for California when I was 19 years old, the first time I went back was in 2005. And I had found out that my cousin, who was my mother's sister's daughter, she ended up hanging herself.
Oh, gosh.
In the basement. She had 3 kids, and she hung herself, And I remember her when we were teenagers, she would write me letters about crazy stuff happening in her house. And that's exactly what was going on in our house. So, I still, to this day, don't understand the correlation between the two. But, it's obvious that both families were being oppressed,
So do you think that it was the same spirit afflicting your mother as it was your aunt? Or was it afflicting your aunt? It was something afflicting your aunt, or was it just the household?
Well, no. I've over the last 40 years, I've become quite the demonologist and know quite a lot about, spirits and afterlife and eschatology and things of that nature. The demonic entities, once, they can't just possess people. They have to be invited. There are limitations, there are boundaries, or else you'd see, evil running amok, uncontrolled. So there are limits and boundaries. And my mother was oppressed at the beginning. She invited a spirit, she invited a spirit in. It first oppressed her, and then she became possessed. And the evidence of that was years later. She had developed to the point where she was talking in other languages with strange guttural voices, arguing with herself. And this would go on 14 hours a day, nonstop.
Oh, wow.
And then when the sun would go down, she'd be screaming and she would go into her room and I would hear all this banging going on, like people were wrestling in there. And I would run in there and open the door to try and catch her, whatever was going on. And she'd be lying in bed with the covers pulled up to her eyes. And I'm going, what the hell is going on? And she wouldn't answer me. She wouldn't say a word. She had this look of terror on her face. And then, I'd close the door, and then 10, 15 minutes later, it would all start up again. And this went on for years. And it got so bad by the time I was 16, my sister had already left because my mother tried to kill her with a butcher knife.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, she chased her around the car outside, and the neighbors called the police. And the police came and brought the mental institution, and they took her away in a straitjacket, But 3 months later, they let her go, and she came back home again, which was bizarre because I was a minor, and she attempted murder, you know?
Well, do you think that she was still at this time? Was it the oppression?
Oh no, she was definitely possessed. She was speaking in foreign languages.
And this was she doing this at the hospital as well? Do you think, or do you think it
Well,
was playing
that's
games?
that's a very interesting thing, and I'll tell you a tidbit of information about that. I had happened to talk to an exorcist who was an exorcist in Canada, actually in Ontario, where this all happened during the mid '70s and early '80s. And I told him that I had just recently, I was doing research for the book, and I called the mental institution that she was 2 times sent there, and I asked for records. And they said, yeah, okay, records, it cost you $35. I said, okay, no problem. They asked for the name. I gave them the name, and she said, first of all, she said that, let me back up a bit. She said, well, records from the 70s and 80s would have been destroyed. We don't keep that stuff. And she said, well, maybe, she goes, well, let me check anyway. I'm right here. So I heard her clacking away on the keyboard, and she goes, She goes, that's strange. They kept all of her records, but they're archived in a building off campus. So I said, okay, well, can you get those for me? She says, yeah, I'll get them for you, and you'll have to pay a $35 fee, and I'll send them to you in the mail. I said, no problem. She said, I'll call you in a couple of days. So I waited, I think, a week. Nobody called me. I called back. I forgot to get the lady's name. I asked for records. I said, somebody was going to send me records, and they said, what's the name? And I said, my mother's name. And they said, nope, we don't have anything like that. Sorry. And they shut me down. So going back to this exorcist that I talked to, this guy told me, he said that was protocol during the 70s and 80s in Canada, that she must have done something when she was at the mental institution that was above their diagnosis. So something freaky or weird went on, and they went, whoa, we don't know what to do with this case. So they archived it, and they sent her back home because they didn't want to be liable. They wouldn't want to be liable for anything that she was doing, and because they couldn't diagnose her. And, if you've looked at exorcism, over the centuries, the doctors never have a diagnosis for it. They'll say epilepsy or whatever, but, epilepsy doesn't make you speak in voices and other languages. It just doesn't,
Yeah, absolutely.
It's supernatural, it's supernatural in its nature. So he told me that was pretty much par for the course, that she must have done something when she was in the hospital there that made them go, okay, we can't diagnose this. So, that's where I got with that. So
now, can you get into some of the stories of what you went through? Is that too personal for you, or?
No. Basically, her daily routine, and this went on for years. Her daily routine was she sat in a chair that actually bottomed out because she was eating everything in the house like a ravenous animal. I mean, there was nothing feminine about her. She was probably 4'11" and weighed 260 pounds. Let me just give you a description. She had straight black hair that went over her eyes. She had a tongue that she would wag at me all the time, and it was serrated all on both sides of the tongue because all her teeth were all smashed and broken in her mouth. And I didn't know how that happened. But she'd open up her mouth, and you could see all her teeth, all her molars were in half, busted in half, usually the inside, and it chewed up her tongue so bad that she had all these calcified ridges on her tongue. It was absolutely disgusting. And
Wow.
She just stank to high heaven. And she spent all her day sitting in a chair, whistling, laughing, singing, and going into these demonic conversations. Like there were 5 people inside of her talking back and forth, taking turns, talking back and forth, and in rapid succession. And it was so disturbing for me that I actually, and this is a result of that post-traumatic stress for me, is I actually started learning languages, foreign languages,
Yeah.
because I could not stand the fact that the things that she was saying I couldn't understand. So to this day, I've taught myself 5 or 6 languages, because of that trauma, not being able to understand, and it being so disturbing to me. So I always
were you
like
able to
was,
find out what, in hindsight, find out what she was saying?
No, because as a kid, I didn't understand what she was saying. And, I had to take this in stride. I mean, this went on for so many years. I mean, you got to understand, I was the proverbial frog in the boiling water. It got turned up very slowly. I mean, I didn't go to school telling my friends, God, you should see what happened at my house today. I never told anyone about it. It was completely normal for me, even though it was disturbing, chaotic, and horrifying. I kept it in. I never said a word to anybody.
I don't know how.
Well, that's a thing that kids, that's how kids deal with trauma. They just shut down. And that's what I did. I shut down emotionally and mentally. But, all of that didn't come out until after I left home and my mother died. She died at 46 years old. The day I left, she died.
The day you left?
The day I left, I had spent a year back down in Toronto collecting money, working, and then I was going to California, and 4 other guys were coming with me. We're all musicians. And during that entire year, everybody backed out to the last minute, and till the last week, actually, and the last guy backed out, and it was just me. So I went by myself, and people tell me, wow, you must have felt so relieved. And there was no relief in sight. This was just the beginning of now my PTSD, now that it was over. And that's why I wrote the second book, because people ask me so many questions about, man, how did you survive? I mean, I came to California as a homeless kid at 19 years old, sleeping under the Santa Monica Pier,
Wow.
But that was paradise for me.
I was about to say, that was probably a lot less scary.
Yeah, it was for a while, because I was, effectively, I was immediately out of the situation. But, I had nightmares for 18 years. I had insomnia for pretty much close to 20 years. I was bulimic. I was over 6 feet tall, and I weighed 126 pounds. These were the effects of all this. I didn't go through puberty till I was 21, because it changed my body chemistry.
Oh, it had to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm
that's a lot of trauma.
old, and I have barely any hair under my arms. I was stunted. My growth was stunted, even though I was 6 feet. Over 6 feet. And I mean, that's when all the problems hit me, all the PTSD. I ended up, I think, at 23 years old or 24 years old, I ended up in Yorba Linda, on suicide lockdown. Because it all came back to me. See, it makes really sense with childhood traumas that it doesn't hit you until you're adult. That's why you hear all these kids that were, molested by priests when they were young, and they're like, well, why are you telling your story now that you're 40 years old?
Yeah.
Well, because now it's affecting me. You see? You can't suppress that. It changes your chemistry. It comes out somehow, If you suppress it, it builds up, and it's a cancer. It'll eat away at you until something triggers it, and then you lose your mind. A lot of people commit suicide, and that's one thing I never did. Was I never had a vice. I wasn't promiscuous. I did smoke a bit, but it was purely out of boredom. I didn't do drugs. I didn't drink alcohol, because I had to stay alert to stay alive.
Yeah.
But that in itself had its own repercussions, because I was a lot like the guy on Russell Crowe was on Beautiful Mind. I was always aware of my situation, always aware of people behind me, in front of me, to the left of me, to the right of me, who posed a threat. It was like military training. I was like a Spartan, and because she ate all our food, I starved as a kid, so I learned to steal. I stole food at school. I stole food out of gardens, and I'm a vegetarian to this day, because I stole so much food out of gardens, eating from gardens, that I'm a vegetarian.
Now, what did your mother die of? How did she pass?
Well, because of her ravenous eating, she had atherosclerosis, and she died of a heart attack at 46 years old. And the only reason why they found her was because the other tenants in her apartment building, she was decomposing.
No.
And they smelled it. And that's what got the police in there. And they tracked me down in California because I had left a number with a family member. Said that you could reach me here if anything. I didn't suspect that anything would be wrong, but in case somebody needed to get a hold of me, because we didn't have cell phones back then, and they called me. My cousin called me and said, your mother had passed away. And they said, well, they found her. They assumed they found her maybe 7 or 8 days after she died. And they said that the coroner said that she probably, the date of death was so-and-so. And after I hung up the phone, I was like, that's the day I left.
Wow.
So it was kind of like a wringing of the hands, the mission accomplished,
It's like the whole purpose was torturing you.
Yes. Yeah. Very astute of you, because my mother, now that I look back at it and have a greater, more peripheral, wider vision, I see now that the target was not my mother. It wasn't my father. It wasn't my sister. It was me, because I went on to come through my hell and become a Christian and tell people of Jesus,
Absolutely.
because Jesus is who saved me. That's who put my life back together again, and that's where I became whole again. And, the enemy, he doesn't like that, and when you speak about and expose the enemy, they hate you more than anything. They want your death. They want your death, and they know ahead of time who's who and who's doing what, and there's many biblical accounts of that where God talks about the enemy and says, well, have you considered my servant so-and-so? If you look at the book of Job,
Job.
Yeah, and then God allows Satan to do all these things to him, and the target wasn't his children, even though he killed all of his children, took his wealth away and took everything. The target was Job, So I'm very aware of that now, and I'm very aware, and but now that I recall everything, I'm able to recall everything that went on now, and I'm able to put everything in its place. I remember a lot of the things that my mother said. I remember so well now that the demonic speech, I see other exorcist transcripts of it, and I recognize the gate of the language, whether it's in German, whether it's in Polish, whether it's in Greek, whether it's in Latin. Once it's transcribed, into English, I can hear the gate. I can hear the things that they talk about and the way they say things. There is a way that they say things because they don't speak like people.
Yeah.
Because they're entities, they're spiritual beings. They have far greater intelligence than we do. They've been around for millennia, and I can hear that common thread of language in it. And it's really fascinating. I'm actually writing a book right now with those insights that I did not include in Devil Take The Hindmost.
Stuff that you probably didn't even know you had at the time.
Yes, but now that I've had 30 years of researching every exorcism and demonic transcript from the 13th century. Now I put it's like a detective. You know how they put a picture on the wall and then they put all these other suspects around and then they have time linear, and this person was here on this date, so it couldn't have been them, and that's what I've done. And I've pinpointed and been able to be very exact in my ideology and identification of demonic spirits and fallen angels and their work and purposes here all throughout history. It's been very fascinating. God has given me this real insight to be able to see the workings. We think life is just, wars happen and bad things happen to good people, and that's not really what's going on. There is purpose behind everything. There is a war and a battle that is unseen that is going on, and we're just the prize and the pawns of it all. We're caught in the middle. It's very interesting.
Let me ask you this. Again, not to get personal with your family and things like this. At the time, I know you said your father was working farther away, but what was his take on all this going on?
Well, yeah, everybody asks that, and to my father's credit, I always tell people, he grew up with his own post-traumatic stress in World War II. He was a child. He was a 5-year-old when they were bombing his house.
Oh, wow.
He saw the Nazis chasing his father across their field, dropping to a knee, and then shooting at him. They actually had a bomb go off. They were hiding in the side of a cave, and a bomb went off, and they couldn't get their donkey inside, and it blew up their donkey, and all the guts went on the kids.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, and then he ended up living for, I think, 4 years in Sabaudia, which was a refugee camp, post-war, after the war. And then from there, they went into general housing. He had, 6 brothers and sisters, and, they lived in one room, so it was very, very difficult life for him, and he had only a 4th grade education, and he came to this country, came to Canada, with nothing. And so, my dad, even though he wasn't there, he was gone from the house 6 days a week, came home for a few hours. He just looked at her like she was crazy. I mean, we all kind of did. We didn't know what to think. None of us said, we need to get a priest in here, or we need to get, none of us ever came to that conclusion, because it went on for so long, and it was so gradual that we got swept up in it. I mean, it was evil, it was horrifying, and we took the horror day by day. I was traumatized to the fact by 10th grade that I went from, academic student who was winning all kinds of awards to failing, because I was losing my mind. By 10th grade, I was losing my mind because she had become so demonic and erratic in her behavior that I believed that what was going to happen, it was going to be her death or mine. It was just a matter of which was going to come first, Now,
how was she hurting you? What was she doing to hurt you?
Well, it was the mental abuse. It was the day-to-day going, and screaming and yelling and hitting herself with a log. She would hit herself with a log for 10 hours a day. I mean, I would leave, come home, it would be nice out, and I would park my bike and I could hear the thudding from outside. And I'd walk in and she'd be whacking herself in the chest and going, and swearing and cursing and then going from different voices to different voices. I mean, it was horrifying to watch, and it made me shake, but I had to return to it every day because that was my home, and no one came to help. Even the neighbors, she would go over to the neighbors, knock on their door, and then in these bizarre voices tell them, I'm going to cut your head off.
Oh, God.
And then walk away. And they'd call the police, and the police would come over like they did 100 times. They would interview her. I would hear them interviewing her from her room, and she'd be using a normal voice that I never heard her speak in. And she'd go, officer, I don't understand. I don't understand why you're here. I don't understand why you're here. Well, Mrs. Gagliardi, we're here because you threatened the neighbors you're going to cut their heads off. I don't know what they're talking about. I never did that. And that was the only time I ever heard my mom talk in a normal voice. And then the second they leave, here she goes, stomping down the the hall, with a boot in her hand, whacking herself in the head.
Oh my goodness.
And this went on at nighttime too. She'd be screaming bloody murder. I'll tell you, I had to sleep for a good, I would say, 6 years. I took bricks and I loaded them into my dresser drawer. And I pushed my dresser drawer at nighttime up against the door, and I slept with a hockey stick in a fetal position for so many years that I wore holes down to the springs in my bed, in my mattress, from my hip, my elbow, my shoulder, my knee, and my ankle, from being in the same position. Those are the weight points, that push into the bed. And I slept like that until I busted right through to the springs for so many years with a hockey stick, because we're Canadian, so we had hockey sticks,
Everyone should.
And I slept like that every night. And every night she came to my door and rattled the door and tried to get in, and then went screaming down the hall. It never ended. It was, and I tell this story all the time. It was like she never slept, because she was awake during the day, and soon as the sun was going down, she retreated to her room, and then the banging and the banging on the walls and the floors and the screaming, then that would all start. And it was like it never ended. And that went on for probably, I think, 8 years.
Now, your father would come home,
Yes.
when he was, off of work or whatever,
Yes.
and he would climb into bed, I'm guessing.
He slept in a separate room.
So he knew it was like she was doing this while he was there too, like her nighttime screaming and hitting and shouting.
Yes, she would do that, and he would just ignore her. He would just ignore her. In fact, during the daytime, if he was there only a few hours on the weekend, and if he was there during the daytime, she would prophesy about him, saying where he was and what he was doing. And I would see him blush, because she'd say, he was, doing adulterous things and being very graphic, and it made me blush, and my dad wouldn't say a thing. He wouldn't say that. And then he'd just leave. He'd go out and get in his car and take off, And
now,
then,
were these things
hours
true, or like was she telling truth in that, or was she just?
Well, yes.
Okay.
She had no clue, but my dad had a girlfriend. He actually had another child with her, and she prophesied about things that I was doing, and I was like, how the hell could she know that? She's here all day. She weighs 260 pounds. She can't get around anywhere. She can barely walk. If she walks, all she would do is walk outside and walk to the neighbors across the street and terrorize them. But she knew things. In fact, my sister told me that she prophesied John F. Kennedy's assassination and a number of other things. But I was like, John F. Kennedy, who the hell's that?
Yeah.
I was just a kid, I made none. But when I got older, I put it all together, Oh, she prophesied too about the Manson murders, and, crazy stuff like this. And,
Wow.
Like I said, growing up in it, the only way we could survive and cope was to just shut her out, which was almost impossible because what her behavior was so oppressive and disturbing that I tried to stay out of the house. And during the summertime, sometimes
I couldn't imagine why, though, Michael.
What's that?
I said I couldn't imagine why.
Yeah, I'd sleep at the park because I was terrified of going home. But you in Canada, you sleep at the park, you get bit by 1,000 mosquitoes, and it has those consequences. So I would say, you know what? I just want to be in my bed. I'm going to deal with it. I'm going to deal with the screaming. I'm going to deal with it just to be in my bed, and that's what I did. I tried to invite myself over at friends' houses to stay the night as much as I could. I stayed out as late as I could, but eventually I always came home because that was my home. It was the only refuge I had, and no one knew what I was dealing with. The police did, but they did nothing, which was surprising. Today, if my story came out, this would have been on CNN and,
It almost reminds me of that book, The Child Called It.
Yes, and I have talked to Dave Peltzer. I have talked to him. I wasn't chained to nothing, but the mental abuse was 24/7. It never stopped. And there were times when I would leave for 3 or 4 days and go camping with friends, who invited me to go camping. And they would drop me off, on the street, and I would just be walking up to the house and I could hear the thumping. And I'd walk in and I'd go, I would swear and see her whacking herself. She was just bloody and red. And I would see her whacking herself with the log, because we had a fireplace inside, and she would be doing this all the time that I was gone. And I would get so frustrated that I would come within an inch of her nose with my nose and yell in her face, stop it. And, God damn it. And I would swear in her face, and I couldn't even rouse a response from her. She would continue on talking as if I wasn't even there. It was mind-blowing. And that's when it started to get so disturbing, with the voices and everything, that I was like, I can't deal with this. At one point, I was going to bomb my high school
Oh,
because I guess that was my way. I now that I look back at it, that was my way of trying to get attention, trying to stop this. But I never said anything. I remember one teacher in 10th grade asking me, she said this to me. She asked me to stay after class, and she said, "Is everything okay at home?" And I said, "Sure, why not?" Because I had been writing absent notices and signing them with my own name.
oh
And I was
gosh.
checking out. At that point, I was checking out. I was losing my mind, and I didn't know how to deal with it anymore.
I mean, it could have also been a subconscious way for you to be out of that house. Like if you did something so dramatic that you were going to get arrested, you knew you would at least sleep in somewhat peace.
Yes. And I was drawing up plans to figure out some way of setting my high school on fire and all this. And nobody really knows about that. And I'm ashamed to even say it, to mention it, but it's the truth, And I was at that point. But I never followed through because my conscience was too weighty. The word conscience means with science, with knowledge. That's what that means, with knowledge. And I had knowledge that was not the right thing to do, even though I knew that was my coping mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
I was screaming out for help because I didn't know you could go to somebody and talk. I mean, we didn't have classes like that back then where they do now, where, if somebody touches you in an inappropriate manner or tries to get you in your car, we didn't have that kind of stuff back then,
Yeah.
And our parents, where you don't talk about things, and boys don't cry and all this crap, and I never said anything to anybody. Even my closest best friends had no idea. They have no idea to this day. Well, they do now that the book's out.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you ever had friends staying at your house.
Never. I was ashamed to bring them over, and I was afraid. Quite honestly, I was afraid. I mean, there were a few times where a couple of my friends came in, and I told them, I said, walk right by my mother and go into my room, and we'll close the door. And then we stayed there 10 minutes, and the stress of it got so bad that I would, say, hey, let's go get lunch. I'll pay for it, just to get them out of the house, so it was that kind of thing. But, no, I never had friends. And I mean, everybody knew that I was the kid with the psycho mother, but no one did nothing. It was impressive.
It's different times, right?
Yeah, they were different times. I mean, nobody talked about anything. And even, after my mother got taken away, by the mental institution in a straitjacket, social workers talked to me, and they were trying to convince me, oh, well, you're 16. You've got a grandmother in Toronto. Why don't you go to Toronto and start a band and all this? It was like they were trying to get rid of me because they didn't know how to deal with it. They didn't know what to say. I give them a little leeway and a little grace with that because it was a substantial, crazy thing. And, none of us knew how to deal with it, but, I was a minor. And the disgrace on their part is that they brought my mother back 2 times.
Yeah.
After locking her up in a straitjacket, trying to, attempting murder, and then bringing her back in the household with a minor. And it was just me and her. My dad was gone, and my sister left. She couldn't handle it anymore.
Yeah, I was going to ask how your sister was after her returning.
Well,
she peeled out.
She felt so bad that she left me there, but she couldn't mentally and emotionally handle it anymore. And she's never talked to me about it. She completely denies it now. She will not talk about it, and she's shut down. She's a hermit. She lives in an apartment all by herself, has no friends, has no life, and that's how she's dealt with it, But she didn't have the worst. When she left, that's when things got really, really scary and really demonic,
Now,
She only saw part of it. I had to spend another couple of years with her.
Now, you say it lasted over 12 years. How long do you think she was in like the oppressed state compared to how long was she in the possessed state?
Well, she was in the oppressed state during the early 70s. And I know that because I remember This is when she began to say she was hearing voices. She was seeing things. And when we moved up to Meaford, and that's where I started kindergarten, so it was a very pivotal point of starting kindergarten, because I remember I did my first day of kindergarten up north. And from that time, when she began to start talking to herself and have conversations with herself, that's when the possession started. And then it continued. And it got worse, progressively worse, year after year, until there wasn't just a few voices talking, and laughing. Now they became diabolical. They became in different languages. And then that's when her voices started changing. And she had several different voices, and they were all weird. They were all weird sounding. And, she was 4'11", and she had a very high voice.
Yeah.
She wasn't capable of making these guttural, conversations and communications. Someone would have their throat stripped from doing that day after day after day. And she did this day after day after day, year after year after year. And it never stopped until nighttime when she went in her room. And then that's when, all kinds of other things manifested, the screaming and the banging and all that kind of stuff. It was, there were two processes she went through. It was the daytime thing and the nighttime thing. The nighttime thing is when it got wicked. She was screaming that Satan was jumping on her chest off the ceiling. I would run into her room. She was screaming. I was always trying to catch, I thought that I could catch her in the act, or, catch something, and she'd be lying in her bed. And, I was, 6 feet, 125 pounds or whatever. And our house was very small. It was only 1,300 square feet. So, all this banging would be going on, and I would run to her room like in a second and a half. And she'd be in her bed with the covers pulled up, holding them with her hands, both hands, right up to her eyes. And her eyes would be like bulging, just bulging out.
So in these, Michael, it wasn't her banging things around, but something was banging things around.
Yes, because I tried to catch her. I tried to catch her in the act because, at that point she was 260 pounds. She did not move very gracefully or very fast at all.
Yeah.
But there was one time that I confronted her, and this was the first time that I actually confronted the demons, not knowing. And this was, and I'll tell you this, this is the last part of the book that really was the ending of it for me, was that because she was eating us out of house and home, my dad decided to put all the food in a big freezer downstairs, the kind you can fit a body in. We had a big one, and my dad put this massive chain on it and put a lock on it. Well, I was coming home one day, and, it's in the basement, and there's an entrance from the inside of the house and from the outside of the house. I parked my bike, and I came in down the stairs from the outside, and I saw her there, leaned over with a hacksaw trying to hack the chain off. And I just yelled, "Hey!" And she looked at me. Her bangs were all in her eyes, her hair super greasy, and she growled at me. She growled at me, and I had never seen that before. And I was just freaking. And then she threw the hacksaw down and she ran upstairs. And me being 6 feet, 125 pounds, I chased her up the stairs because I was like, this has got to end. I don't know what it did, but when she growled at me, that set something off in me that I was like, now's the conflict. It's you or me. I've got to end this. It's you or me. That was my exact thoughts. And she beat me up the stairs. I mean, this 260-pound woman, she was wearing clothes that were all shredded because she was so obese. Her clothes were all shredded, and she ran into her room and slammed the door so hard that the air vacuumed out of the house and all the windows were shaking. And she was leaning against the door so hard that it was bulging out. And I was standing on the other side in the hallway thinking to myself, I got to open this door. I was drawn to the fear. I was totally drawn to it. And I was like, this has got to end. This has got to end. I can't deal with this anymore. And she was holding the doorknob. I couldn't even budge the doorknob. And like I told you, she's 4'11", and I'm basically a man at this point at 6 feet. I'm 16 years old, 17 years old. And I couldn't get the door open. So I just stood there, and I could hear her growling and breathing heavy behind the door. This was not a woman. This was not a woman. This was, some sort of guttural animal, was coming out of her. And I waited there for like 10 minutes. Then all of a sudden the bow in the door was left, and I saw the door relax, and I saw the doorknob relax. So I said, I kind of wringed my hands, like what people do. They rub their hands together to get ready to do something. I remember doing that because my hands were tingling.
Yeah.
And I opened the doorknob really quick, and we locked eyes, and this is where I lost my mind. The left side of her face, above her eyebrow to her temple, was big and bulging, like the size of a golf ball, and it was pulsating back and forth. And this is what freaked me out, kind of like when you grab a balloon and it bulges out one other side.
Yeah.
You put pressure on one side. And I looked in her eyes, and her eyes were just jet balls of black. She had no pupil. She had no iris. I could see nothing but black. She lunged at me, growling, and I turned around and took off. We were about 3 feet apart, and she chased me down the hall, into the living room, and to the front door. I took off out the door onto the driveway, and I looked back. She wasn't following me. Then all of a sudden, I heard the door slam again, and I could see the windows in the front rippling from the force, And at that point, I was in utter shock. I was trying to say a word, and I just kept going, and I couldn't. I was saying in my mind, to calm down, just say a word. And I couldn't say a word because I was freaking out about what I just saw. So I decided, I knew that on that specific day, my dad was home. I reached in, and our phone, it was the rotary dial phone, was just inside the door. And it had a long cord on it, thank God. I grabbed it, I went out onto the porch, and I began to try to dial the number to my father's girlfriend's house, which I had in my head. Back then you had phone numbers in your head, And I couldn't get my finger into the rotary dial. I couldn't do it. And it took me, I don't know, between 10, 15 minutes to dial the number correctly. I'd get halfway through it and then dial, because I couldn't get my finger in. I was shaking so bad.
Adrenaline through the roof.
Oh, my God. I was shaking so bad. And his girlfriend answered the phone, and I couldn't say a word. I was just, I was stuttering, and she said, I could hear him. She said, Emmanuel, because that's my father's name. And he got on the phone. He goes, what's going on? And I just said, Mom, like that, the best I could. And he said, I'm coming right over. And I know he was only a mile away because he was there within, 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And he pulled into the driveway. He asked me what happened. I couldn't tell him. I couldn't tell him. I don't even know what I just saw.
Yeah.
I was in absolute shock. So I followed him into the house. He said, okay, I'm going in. And I followed him in because I was still drawn to this. I can't explain it. I was so drawn to it. The second he opened the door from the mudroom to the lobby, she was standing right there. She grabbed him, threw him to the floor. I mean, at that point in time, my dad was in his early 40s. He was 5'7", 5'8", maybe 140, 150 pounds. She threw him to the ground and started scratching his face and growling like an animal.
Wow.
He was, I could see he was like, I was just sitting there with my eyes and mouth aghast going, what the hell is going on? And he was able to get away from her, break free away from her. He ran out the front door. I ran out right behind him. She again slammed the door, and the front windows were just rippling back and forth. I thought they were going to, break. And he was in complete shock. We stood out there, and the both of us were in complete shock, and we've never talked about it to this day.
Really?
Never said one word about it to this day about it. He called the police. The police immediately called the mental institution. They came out, and they took her away. And, once again, they interviewed her. I could hear her from outside because her bedroom window was right there. I could hear the police talking with her. She talked in a normal voice, and then they took her away. And from then on, I had lost my mind. I didn't know how to cope with reality at that point. I was a complete wreck, and I ended up quitting high school within the next year because I couldn't deal with life. I didn't know how to function. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I couldn't think. I didn't know what to think. I didn't know what I saw. I don't know what happened, and I didn't know who I was. It was a disaster.
Wow.
Yeah, I just didn't know what to do. So you can see how easy it was for me to, in a couple of years from that, to leave and go and be homeless in California. That was like paradise, even though I was living under the Santa Monica Pier.
Now, Michael, because I'm sure after hearing this story, which incredibly intense story, if people want to read your book and they want to follow up on what's going on and they really want to dig into the details, how can they find your book?
Well, right now it's available only on Kindle through Amazon, and the book is, I don't know, it's $6 or $7 or something like that. And then the first book's called Devil Take The Hindmost. The second book is Devil Take The Hindmost Part 2, The Aftermath, which the first book takes you from, the early 70s to, my final departure at 19 years old to Los Angeles. And then the second book picks up from 19 until current day and everything that I went through. And, the spirits, they followed me to California and they oppressed me greatly to try to commit suicide. And that's, everything that I talk about then. We had many occurrences in our house and all kinds of stuff. And, I had many brushes with death. 3-4 times I was almost killed, and so that's in the second book. But if you have Kindle Unlimited, it's actually free to you.
There you go.
Yeah, if you have Kindle Unlimited, I think you pay $20 a month. You get unlimited reads. But they're only available on Amazon for Kindle use. I think they now have an app on Google Play that you can download it to an iPhone or an Android.
How can people get up with you?
Well, if you'd like to contact me, and I like to keep it, on a, don't write me if you've got, you want to tell me if I'm a liar. It's not going to get you anywhere. I'm not going to answer. I'm not going to play that game. I'm far too old and tired for that kind of nonsense. But if you have something of compassion, or somebody who's going through this that needs attention, you can write me at my email is eventsmg, which is in capitals, Gagliardi. So eventsmgagliardi@gmail.com with the M and the G as capitals. It'll still get to me whether they're not, I guess, too.
All right. And when's the movie coming out? Are we getting a movie of this one day?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm getting a few producers that are talking about, making doing a film adaptation of it. So actually writing a screenplay. I'm not sure where I am with that because Hollywood, a great podcast would be, picking apart the Exorcist movie, and I can tell you what's fake and what's real. That'd be a great podcast.
That'd be a good one.
Yeah, but I would probably allow a movie if I was able to consult on it because I would want it portrayed in reality. I don't want sensationalism, no head spinning or any junk like that, but I would want, as it truly was eyewitnessed, as I saw it, and there's even stuff that is absolutely abominable that I didn't write in the book. I can't bring myself to put it down in words. So, and I don't know if I'll ever reveal that stuff, it just makes me sick to my stomach.
Now, Michael, I really want to thank you, for coming on the show. I'm telling you, I've been doing radio for a long time, and this may be one of the most intense stories that I've heard. You kind of left me speechless there, and I think I've had goosebumps the entire time. So,
well, unfortunately, Jordan, it's all true. And I hate, like I said, I hate to say that it's true, and I still have the effects of it. I mean, I'm a complete mess nowadays, even though I have Christ in my life and I'm happy. But I mean, the after effects, what it's done to me mentally. I have severe PTSD. I black out several times a year. I just pass out. I can't deal with stress. I can't be in rooms full of people and loud noises and loud things. And, I'm very much a victim of it even to this day. So, but it's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Jordan, for having me come on. And I hope there's somebody out there that may be experiencing these type of things, or maybe even not to this degree, but be able to speak up about it, because the person affected and the whole family is being destroyed, and it doesn't have to be like that.
That's right. And again, because we are out of time, I do want to thank you. We'll probably discuss having you back on, at some point. We can discuss what happens in book 2.
Sure.
And what is it called? The Aftermath?
Yeah, Devil Take The Hindmost Part 2, The Aftermath.
Yeah, we can talk about that aftermath. But thank you so much, and we will talk again, okay?
Thank you, Jordan. I appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And with that, the fire is out. Michael, I want to thank you for being so open and honest and raw with this story. I know it can't be easy to tell, and we appreciate you sharing it with us. For everybody listening, make sure you stay connected with us out on all the socials. So Facebook, Fireside Paranormal Hub. On Twitter, it's at Fireside Parapod, Parapod. Make sure you add us there. Instagram, TikTok. We got the Patreon, the Discord. And we're trying to do as much stuff as we can to have as much fun as we can with y'all. So definitely keep up with us. And again, if you want your stories on the air, make sure you email us at firesideparanormalpodcast@gmail.com. Until next week, everybody, don't be afraid, only believe.